Hey everyone, Warix here. So we're about a week out when this is going to drop on YouTube from the patch 11.1 Liberation of Undermine patch that's coming out, and I wanted to kind of sit down and take some time. I've been messing around a little bit on PTR, no footage that I recorded unfortunately because I was just playing with some things, but I kind of wanted to talk about Monk and what it's potentially going to look like come patch 11.1. Now, I did a video similar to this. I'll have to go digging into my things to find it. If Editor Works finds it, it's up in that corner over there. That kind of talked about my predictions for Season 1 of The War Within, and would we see Monk in, like, the high key metas. And I think for the most part, if I recall correctly, I was correct. I said the Brewmaster was the most likely Monk spec that you would see. With Windwalker not really being seen at all, although Liquid did play it because they have, one of the best Windwalkers ever playing it. And then Mistweaver Monk was kind of a wild card, and unfortunately, that wild card did not pan out this time. So, what I wanted to do here is kind of take another stab at this and see what we're thinking. And I'm going to talk about these specs in order. So we'll start with Brewmaster Monk. As you can see here, I've got my set pretty much all ready to go. Brewmaster Monk is in an interesting spot in that in Season 1, it was very weak in Mythic Plus, but decent enough in Raid that it was worthy of being your Monk buff if you were min-maxing your Raid comp, or if you just had someone that really loved playing it, it was solid enough in Raid. But in Mythic Plus, I mean, you having tanked to, I think it was around 2500 on Monk this time. I spent a lot of time playing Mistweaver this patch, but having played Monk to 2500 in Brewmaster rather, I could definitely tell, like, when you were sitting in the 619 levels of gear and things like that, there was a lot of struggles that Brewmaster had. You took a lot of damage. You were slamming certain cooldowns defensively, like Fort Brew and Dampen Harm and stuff like that, just on cooldown, just to live a standard trash pack. And then things like Diffuse Magic you were using on whatever the most deadly. I don't know why I have these on, because whatever, so apologies for my hair. But Brewmaster Monk was just in a really, really big struggle bus. Now, as we started getting up into the upper 620s, 630 item levels, you see here I sit at 637 now on this character. For the most part, some of the issues with Brewmaster Monk start to go away a little bit, but they're still very obvious. And there wasn't a lot of changes that happened in the PTR. So the biggest changes that we got in the patch is that where's Celestial Brew? Yeah, so Celestial Brew basically got a small buff to where instead of stacking up to 10 times, it's going to stack up to 6 times, and it's going to be at 35% for each stack. So instead of being 200%, it's going to end up being 210%, which makes things like the Master of Harmony tree a lot better to play because you're going to run things like Double Celestial Brew. So it does make Celestial Brew feel better to play in that regard. And then also running Master of Harmony has a lot higher quality of life versus running Shadow Pan, which, you don't really think about your Celestial Brew stacks. You just kind of use it. Master of Harmony, you kind of need to pay attention to them because you're trying to build up this vitality and then unleashing a Celestial Brew at just the right time to deal as much damage and healing as you can. So, like, that's really the changes that they got. And then in the latest PTR build, just all tanks across the board got a damage buff. Brewmaster got a flat 15% or a damage buff. So overall, like, the spec didn't see a ton of changes, which tells me that Blizzard is pretty content with how it's playing and what it feels like its trajectory is. Now, for the longest time, Brewmaster Monk has always been a really, really solid raid tank, but has never had its moment in the sun when it comes to Mythic Plus. At least since I've come back to the game, it may have had some, like, periods in Legion, but from BFA till today, it's never been like the tank that people go chase and try to gear up. They're always playing, right now it's Paladin or DH or Blood DK or whatever the case may be. You know, even Prout Warrior back in BFA had its time. Guardian Druid in Season 2 of Dragonflight had its time. So, like, every other tank has had this one patch, at the very least, where they were the superstar of high key metas, and Brewmaster is really the only one that is not. Outside of one time, they competed heavily with Prout Warrior and BFA because of a bug to Spirit of the Ox and Gift of the Celestials. So, that got fixed and significantly reduced our self-healing. But anyways, Brewmaster Monk is in kind of a weird spot where I think certain buffs that would be really welcome in Mythic Plus would make the tank very broken in Raid. So I think Blizzard's kind of sitting on a weird moment right now, which is where buffing things like, I think, Celestial Brew comes into play, and buffing smaller talents that see more value out of a Mythic Plus build than what they do. So like buffing Anvil and Stave, I think, would be really cool. Buffing these Ox Dance right here would be really cool, because those are things that are very minor impact in Raid, but are going to be big impact in Mythic Plus. So I would love to see some approach taken to that. They tried to do things like buffing Nijao, but it's Nijao. It still promotes bad gameplay in order to be super, super effective. I would love for Nijao to be completely burned to the ground and redesigned, but not so tied to how much you purify, but rather how much you... I would actually prefer to see it as something more along the lines of how much you absorb through your Celestial Brews. So using it well, or it makes sure your brews cool down faster, or do something like that while the damage component of it isn't, you know, and then your stomp on it is based off of, you know, something else. But they need to rethink this cooldown in particular, but it is what it is. So that's kind of the state of Brewmaster as we head into 11.2, a little bit rambly, but basically it's pretty good in Raid. The weakest tank in Mythic Plus needs some help there, but making changes in Mythic Plus that are going to make it really good are probably going to be very difficult to make without breaking it in Raid, without being very small, minor adjustments to certain AoE based talents. That said, how do I think Mythic Plus is gonna, or how do I think Brewmaster is gonna be in patch 11.1? Are we gonna see it in Race to World First again? Will we see it in the high key meta? Will it creep up its way? I'm gonna say no to both, and at least not in mass. You might see a couple guilds using it, but I don't think you're gonna see it heavily flavored. So one of the things that I've been kind of looking at is kind of the state of what classes are looking like. And how does that affect the Race to World First comps and things like that? Now, I'm not professional, and I'm not living in that Race to World First life, but someone that is always very curious as to how these guys come to their decision-making process. I try to take a look at it. And there are two things that I think are going to really hold Brewmaster back from being prominent in the very highest raid guilds in the world, these top 5, top 10 guilds in the world. One of them is Mistweaver. Mistweaver Monk is looking really strong. We'll talk more about why in the next patch, or here in a little bit in the next section. But Monk is a situation where you only are going to bring one class, or one of the class, unless it's just absolutely broken. You're only going to bring one. It's been a very, very long time, if ever, that you've brought more than one Monk to a raid. So, Mistweaver being very strong, at least looking very strong going into the next patch, I think is going to be a major hindrance to seeing Brewmaster played in these keys. The other thing is that I think that, you know, tanking in the Race to World First meta is usually a matter of what buffs do you need to bring to your raid. So kind of looking over the situation, Moonkin Druid is looking slightly better, but Feral's not looking great, Resto's not looking great. So Bear is going to be a very popular pick for Druid, so that's going to be a tank right there. And then Blood DK is looking very good for Raid. And Blood DK is just a tank that, when played well, it's just, you can't kill it. Like, it's very, very hard to kill it. So I think those are probably going to be your prominent ones. We could also see Prout Warrior slide into the tank meta a little bit. And so because there's, and Vengeance is looking good as well, and Havoc, we'll see. I haven't taken a deep dive into Havoc yet, or even just enough to understand kind of where they're potentially standing. So if Havoc isn't all that great, then you're going to see Vengeance, you're going to see Druid, I think you'll see DK, and I think you'll see Prot Warrior, all sitting in that section for being the tank that's there. For Mythic Plus, I think it's going to be better. I get the sense that the more item level that we are going to get this expansion, the better off we are going to be. And there's been some quiet conversation amongst tanks that while it may not be the best tank, Brewmaster might be quite good. Are you going to see it in the esport competitions, the MDI, the TGP, and people pushing the highest live keys? Probably not. Prot Paladin didn't get enough changes to really kind of usurp it from that position. But there are people that are saying, look, if you're a Brewmaster lover and you're tired of playing Prot Paladin for high keys, or you're wanting to be a Brewmaster that kind of pushes higher into like the 12, the 13s, which are going to be required in order to get the 3K achievement that's coming next patch, Brewmaster is going to be in a much better place to be able to do that than it was in patch 11.0. So Brewmaster, I think, is going to be in an interesting position. I'm hoping Blizzard is taking a look at this and watching this tank very carefully, because I think it needs something, and you need to give kind of hope to Brewmaster players who have seen very, very few changes outside of alpha beta cycles in a long, long time. And there are a lot of people that are calling for, I mean, I've seen some calls for the spec to be completely reworked. I think that's silly. But I do think that it needs something to kind of reinvigorate the community behind it a little bit, and to reinvigorate the general tank community behind it, because it's already the least played class, and now it's the least played tank of the least played class. It just puts everything in kind of a awkward position, and I think just a little bit of invigoration to the community would be good too, and get players excited to play it again, outside of folks like me who are diehards and are going to play it anyways. Alright, so let's talk about Mistweaver. So Mistweaver Monk got quite a few changes. Some I think are going to be way more impactful than others. The big ones I think are going to be Manatee got a just straight up 15% nerf in the last set of PTR build notes, so that's something that you probably are not super excited about. But the one that I'm most curious about is going to be Jade Empowerment. Got a change to where it now does, I think it's 2000% damage to your primary target, and then changed to 4 additional targets at something like 200% effectiveness. So it's going to make Crackling Jade Lightning a massive part of your damage kit, and when you combine it with things like Jade Fire Teachings, it's going to be like a really strong group heal in Mythic Plus, and then potentially even you'll see it play in Raid, where it'll be a strong like single target damage button. Now I don't know for certain if that's going to be the case, but I still think that that's a possibility. And for those of you that are climbing the Mythic Plus ladder, when you hit your Tyrannical week at key level 7, as it will be in the next patch, Jade Empowerment's going to feel much better to use on single target bosses, because it's just going to do a lot more damage to a single target. So it gives you some prio damage, it gives you some decent cleave damage, and then of course you have things like Blackout Kick and Spitting Crane Kick and Rising Sun Kick that kind of fill out the rest of your damage kit, along with Jade Fire Stomp in Mythic Plus. So like a really good, strong damage kit. It may not be tuned the greatest, but at least it's, at its core, it's very sensible to play. And then you have like just a ridiculously strong healing kit to go behind it. Now this is kind of like the general raid build that you see a lot of people play. Takes advantage of things like Lotus Infusion, takes advantage of things like Pool of Mists and Misty Peaks, along with things like obviously Rising Mist and Invoker's Delight when you throw out your Yulon, throws out Jade Bond, you're seeing Uplifted Spirits. Like the healer has a really strong set of a kit, and this talent of Rushing Jade Wind adds a really interesting kind of setup for the spec, where you are wanting to get out as many Renewing Mists as possible, and then you get this Rushing Winds for 4 seconds. It gives Renewing Mist even more healing. Now, Renewing Mist's healing on its own is not like the most powerful thing, but this gives you like another way to cleave heal, and then you can use it on single target. It's really good. So like some really interesting divergent playstyles for Mistweaver Monk. Both hero talent trees see play. Con of the Celestials is generally the more popular pick because it's a lot safer in the eyes of a lot of people. Doesn't do as much damage as Master of Harmony does, but you get Celestial Conduit, which is a very strong healing cooldown that takes advantage of the fact that you get particularly Courage of the White Tiger and then Chi-Ji Swiftness. So you get this nice little movement speed buff, and then Flight of the Red Crane as well also does well, and then Strength of the Black Ox makes Enveloping Mist very, very good to use, and is a strong way to get more absorbs out, but also it's just a good way to make your Renewing Mist even more powerful. Like I said, it doesn't do the most damage, but it is a very, very safe healing cooldown, and so you see a lot of people using it. It's obviously the meta pick right now in Raid, and probably will continue to be that way. And in Mythic Plus, it's a very good pick because it's very flexible, very versatile in its use. Whereas Master of Harmony does a lot more damage, but there's a lot more setup that goes into it that makes it a little bit more complex to play and does punish misplaying a little bit more. Whereas Con of the Celestials, if you screw up, you can just hit the button and you're going to generally be put into a situation where you are, at least at the very least, going to give yourself the breathing room in order to catch up. Here, you don't really see that. So all these changes combined to put Mistweaver Monk back on the radar of a lot of high key pushers and world first level and Hall of Fame level rating guilds. So what is it going to look like for season 2? I think Mistweaver Monk is going to be seen a lot. I think it's going to be one of the 4 healers that you see in your general Race to World first level comps, mainly because things like Resto Shaman and Preservation Evoker are not in the greatest spots. I think you're going to see, obviously, Disc Priest, Mistweaver Monk, and potential for Resto Druid, but I think those 2 are like almost locked in to almost every comp right now. Potentially Holy Priest as well, but I think Disc is just better with Barrier. And then Mistweaver Monk providing strong raid cooldown and revival. It has a really potent spread cleave healing through Renewing Mist spread. You get strong haste buffs through Secret Infusion, or the versatility through using it through Rising Sun Kick. So like there's just a lot of different ways that you can use this. It lives pretty well. You can go grab something like Healing Elixir. Expel Harm does a lot of healing on yourself through Vigorous Expulsion. Then you can even grab something like Profound Rebuttal, but Strength of Spirit is obviously very, very good. So like some really good ways to keep yourself alive, and then just really strong spread cleave AoE heal, and then you have your Yulon ramps, which are very, very powerful. Mythic Plus, Chi-Ji got a boost as well to be more effective on single target boss fights. So like just a lot of really, really good changes. Like whoever's working on Mistweaver Monk really pays attention to the spec and what it's capable of, what its weak points are, what its confusion points are, and what are some things that don't seem very intuitive, and does something about them. So I think Mistweaver Monk will probably start the season as the Meta Mythic Plus healer, although Discipline is still going to be around, and Power Infusion is a level of utility that Monk can only dream of. It doesn't bring a stamina buff. Mystic Touch is, I've been on record saying Mystic Touch is very, very weak. So it's going to have competition. I don't think it's going to be like the dominant healer. But I think it's going to poke its head in, and you're going to see a lot of high-end comps playing Mistweaver Monk, both in Raid and in Mythic Plus. And I think you're going to see a variety of both hero talent builds being played. So Mistweaver Monk, if you're a Mistweaver main, I think you're very happy with where you're looking at for the next patch, and you should be excited. All right, Windwalker Monk. Windwalker Monk it's quietly had like a decent run. It's not the dominant melee spec. I mean, nothing is Enhancement Shaman right now. It was DK early in the season. And there are a lot of other melee specs right now that I think are better than it in terms of its DPS output, and the stats on things like the Mythic Raid rankings and things like that will back that up. In fact, let me go see if I can find the other ones real quick. But Windwalker Monk has had itself a nice little like start to the season. Yeah, as I take a look at the latest damage to bosses, like yeah, Windwalker Monk, pull this over for you. Yeah, Windwalker Monk is in the bottom half, bottom third of the specs right now. Overall damage, it's there. But I mean, we're not talking that far behind the dominant specs like Rogue and Survival Hunter, Havoc Demon Hunter, and Ret Paladin. Even Arms Warrior, Fury Warrior. Like, it's keeping up. Like, it's right there with Fury. Very, very close when you're talking to the rest of these. It's literally just this outlier and enhancement that makes it look so far behind. But even Survival, like, that's probably, 3 to 4%, which is, I think, within a pretty solid margin of error. So Windwalker Monk has had itself in a pretty decent time. I think the biggest change that people are kind of paying attention to is going to be the removal of Darting Hurricane and replacing it with Slicing Winds, which basically makes your Flying Serpent Kick a DPS button. And it has an Empower setup like Evoker does, where the longer you channel it, the more damage it's going to do. Or the further distance you're going to travel, rather, the damage is going to stay flat, from my understanding. It's been divisive amongst the Windwalker community. I'm someone that uses Flying Serpent Kick a lot for mobility. You think on a fight like Rashanan, for example, the Mythic version, when you're trying to get to those corners and get your interrupt done before he goes immune to damage from Acidic Eruption, having Flying Serpent Kick is super valuable there. And trading that out just to get a slightly more bit of damage out, I don't think is going to be very valuable. But other than that, just some minor tweaks on the edge for Windwalker Monk. So again, I think it's something that they're going to keep an eye on, but I do think it's a spec that probably is going to be a prime candidate for aura buffs once we get into the, particularly as we get into, I'd say week 2, week 3 of the raid, when they've got a lot of data across all 3, even 4 potential, if they consider LFR as heavily as they may. But the spec itself, like I said, I think it's had a decent run of it. It's got really consistent damage. In Mythic Plus, you basically have a cooldown for almost every pack with 2 charges of your Storm, Earth, and Fire, and then you get your big burst with Zhuen. Strike of the Windlord has seen some really powerful additions to it. You grab things like Rushing Jade Wind now in AoE, which gives you just a really great AoE damage profile. Like, I think this spec is in a really good spot in terms of how it plays and what it's intended to do. Now it's just a matter of firming up the edges a little bit, making it a little bit more polished feeling to play. And then I'm always going to be a guy that says we got to do something about this. Hit combo, your mastery being a talent is just dumb. Like, just bake this into the mastery. Now, they did buff mastery. We'll see if that makes the spec more favorable to having it. Right now, it's still the lowest of the secondary stats in terms of priority for most players. So buffing mastery the way that they are they going to make it more valuable in that regard? We'll see. I do think that there's some fundamental issues with the Windwalker mastery and what happens when you misplay it, but I've gone over that before. But overall, as someone that's played Windwalker in Raid and again played it to... I didn't play a ton of Windwalker in Mythic Plus this year, but I was still 2300-ish, I think. So did, 8s, 9s, and a couple of 10s on it. So there is value in the spec being where it's at. It's, a spec that has good cleave in its best single target build, and then it has decent single target, and it's like full-on Mythic Plus build because of things like Zhuen. You get Strike of the Windlord doing a lot of value for you. Whirling Dragon Punch, I think, could maybe feel a little bit better to press. You press it now because it is a good damage button, but it needs to feel like, pardon the pun, but punchier when you use it. I would like it to be like way more valuable feeling when you hit it. Like, it needs to be a significantly higher portion of our damage. I don't have a recent Windwalker log to show anything, but I think the spec is in a pretty decent position. I'm a little concerned about its tier set. From a hero talent perspective, Shado-Pan started off as like a very, very dominant thing, but they made a few changes, small changes to Conduit of the Celestials, to where now Conduit of the Celestials actually sims within like less than 1% in terms of DPS output in single target, and it's pretty much even in AoE. So there is like a argument that you could play Conduit of the Celestials right now. I'm playing it right now because it's actually better to use it for if you're trying to solo double question mark Zekvir. And I love Conduit. I think it's really fun and adds a lot to the Windwalker kit, particularly with things like Restore Balance, giving you that Rushing Jade Wind. So again, really good in AoE, burst AoE, giving you all this extra damage, a little bit of off healing. Like, it's just a really fun and potent cooldown, where Shado-Pan gives you a very, very consistent damage profile. And at 240 energy, I mean, that's, you know, Tiger Palm, I think, is it is 60, so you're talking every 4 Tiger Palms, you're basically firing off the flurry strikes, and in between, you actually generate your flurry charges very, very quickly, because you can sometimes get 2 off of things like a fat Rising Sun Kick thing. Fist of Fury generates a lot, particularly during cooldowns. So, like, it does very good consistent damage, whereas Conduit does offer that burst, kind of quickly burst. So, like, fight specific, Mythic Plus specific dungeons could see it play a lot. Shado-Pan does offer slightly better defensives, because you can always instant vivify yourself every now and then you get this extra agility through against all odds. And Wisdom of the Wall is actually a pretty good passive, whereas over here, I mean, you're relying heavily on things like Jade Sanctuary. When you cast your Conduit, Inner Compass is decent, but, like, you know, Heart of the Jade Serpent, like, the defensive value here just isn't as high, but it is much more offensive based. But I think that's okay, particularly in a raid scenario where, you know, between Karma, 1 minute Fort Brew, and then you're, you know, diffuse magic into Yu'lon's Grace for the majority of the fight, depending on what you need. Like, there's some real value in Windwalker defensives. I think are pretty good. So, are we going to see it in High Keys and High Mythic Plus? Or, excuse me, High Raid and High Mythic Plus? I'm going to say no. I think that the way, again, Mystery Vermonk is probably going to be the biggest barrier for seeing Windwalker in the highest level of raid performance. But if you have a dedicated Windwalker player on your comp, I think you're going to be pretty happy having them around, because they're going to be solid. You may see 1 or 2 outliers, as you always do in most cases, but I don't think en masse, and that's when we're talking about this. That doesn't mean that the spec is bad. It just means that it doesn't fill a role that is valuable enough to bring 2. I think you're going to see, obviously, Enhancement Shaman, I still think, is one of the best DPS out there. I think Unholy DK might be sneaky good. Havoc Demon Hunter is going to be in play. Rogue is obviously going to be very valuable, with the Trophic Poison and Assassination, Outlaw, and even Subtlety have all been looking pretty strong lately. And from what I gathered from folks that have done raid testing, Survival Hunter is always going to be good, I think, damage-wise, but nobody plays it. Because, again, like, Hunter's Mark is not mega valuable, and Marksmanship and Beast Mastery are both looking really good, and that's where the majority of your Hunter population sits. But, like, you know, Rogue, Shaman, DK, Arms Warrior, Fury Warrior, both are looking pretty good from what I understand as well. Because of that, there's just like 3 or 4 melee that just kind of are probably going to be in front of the line in terms of considerations for Race to World First Comp, which means that Windwalker is going to find itself sitting on the outside, along with the obstacle of Mistweaver, I think, going to be very, very good. In Mythic Plus, again, I think it's got a very solid dungeon profile, but it's not like the best. And the utility that Monk brings is very limited and niche and very specific. Obviously, Ring of Peace is one of the best mob displacement tools, but beyond that, again, Mystic Touch requires you kind of building the comp around making it good. You do have things like a Soothe if it's needed, but it's on a 45-second CD, basically, so it's not a consistent Soothe versus Trank Shot or even Druid Soothe. So like that's again still pretty niche. Leg Sweep again is a good AoE stun, but you know, AoE stuns have lost a lot of value because they don't stop casting anymore. So like there's just a lot of things with the utility kit of Monk in general. It affects all three specs, but particularly Windwalker, that make it so that I don't see it finding its way into the highest of high keys. Now again, if you're sitting in LFG and you're doing your weekly 10s or whatever the case may be, and there's a Windwalker that signs up, I don't think it's a bad idea to invite them, you know, without having to consider all those things, because again, someone that's playing Windwalker at any sort of decent level is pretty dedicated to playing the spec and at least knows what they're doing on a general level. And then because for like weekly 10s you don't have to min-max everything in order to gain the most out of your group, inviting a Windwalker player, which again is on the lowest played class, means that it's someone that kind of they're dedicated to playing the spec and trying to do all the little things that could potentially maximize it. So it feels safe to bring them along. So the TLDR of this video, I think Mistweaver Monk is going to be the most popular Monk spec in Season 2 because it is looking the strongest comparatively speaking to its, you know, competing lineup of healers versus Windwalkers and melee DPS and Brewmasters and tanks. That said, I think all three specs are going to find themselves, you know, I think Mistweaver will be well above average, but I think Windwalker is going to be a pretty solid DPS. Like, it's not going to shine, but if you have one, it's going to be consistent in the way it performs. And Brewmaster Monk, I think, is going to be better than Season 1. I think there needs to be a very close eye kept on it for Season 2. But if, you know, the number of people that I think have been whispering about it being sneaky good for Season 2 is true, and not just people blowing smoke because they're just want to generate a conversation or get impressions on their tweets or whatever, then, you know, I think you're going to be in a better spot. Is it going to be great? Probably not overall, but if you're looking to only finish out your weekly 10s or whatever the case may be, I think you're very going to be absolutely capable of doing that. It's if you're someone that wants to push into getting into those 13s or those 14s or those 15s or getting into that high key meta, that you're going to have to stand out in ways that players that chase meta specs don't have to. So that said, Monk is in, I think, a pretty decent spot. There's still things that I would like to see done to it, particularly when it comes to the utility kit, and then some minor things for every spec. But as someone that is a ardent Monk fan, I'm pretty happy with where the class is sitting right now. I'm not overjoyed, but I'm happy. It's not in the dirt, but it's not, you know, sitting on top of the pillar where I'm just waiting for the nerfs to come. And frankly, with 39 specs in this game, that's about as good as you can ask for in reality because of the way Blizzard historically has balanced the game. So yeah, give me your thoughts, your comments, things like that below. Remember to like, share, subscribe. I appreciate you all clicking on this video and dealing with my ranting for 35 minutes on Monk. So until the next video, I hope you all stay safe. Hope you enjoy yourself. You're having fun. You keep on gaming, and we'll see you next time.